Okay, we're on Chapter 10, Lesson 7, working and ordering decimals. This has you using number lines. I also think it's going to be really handy to have a place value chart that goes out at least to the hundredths place in the decimals. So I found this one on Math Salamanders, and it goes as far as you need to, it goes past where you need to go for fourth grade place values. So this is basically as far as we're going with these lessons. And I'm going to use both the number line that they've given and the place value chart to help us get this done. I'm just going to try and keep the camera out of the way of this. Example 1. At recess, Austin and his friend decided to have two races. One was 2/10 of a mile and the other was 4/10 of a mile. Which race was longer? Use a number line. 4/10 and 2 here and 4/10 here. And as we go farther right, the greater the number gets. So continuing higher up the value, here's the whole over here. We can see that 4 is greater than 2/10. So 4/10 is greater than 2/10. That's using the number line. Now the other way is using place value, and they've just given the number chart there. So it's important when you're using place value chart is to make sure that you're lining up your place value. So here we're talking about only the tenths place. So we've got 2/10 and we've got 4/10. And since they're both to the same place value and 4 is the greater digit, then we know that the 4/10 is going to be the greater number. So longer race was the one that was 4/10, as is shown here. Notice you can only compare 4/10 and 2/10 because the whole, which is 1 mile. Okay, example has 2 more levels of difficulty than the last problem because we're ordering numbers and we're dealing not just with the tenths place, but with the hundredths place value as well. So we're going to order 15 hundredths, 38 hundredths, tenths from greatest to least. So first I'm just going to copy the numbers into my place value chart. So I have 0.15, 1/10, 5 hundredths. I have 0.38, 3/10, 8 hundredths. And I have 0.3/10, which, as we learned from the other lessons, especially lesson 5, 0 hundredths for this one. So now we have the same going out, extending out to the same place value for all the digits. Now I'm going to start just like comparing numbers when we're dealing with the whole number digits. We're going to start at the farthest left. So I'm going to look at my tenths column first, and I see that 1 is less than 3, which is my other two numbers. So I'm only going to be looking at 38 hundredths and 30 hundredths. Then I'm going to go to my hundredths place value. Remember, I'm not including this one right now. So I've got 3/8 and 3/0. Well, 0 is less than 8, so my greatest one is right here. So in writing them in order, my greatest is going to be 38 hundredths. And when that one is out, what is the next greatest? Well, I'm going to go back to my tenths place, and I'm comparing 1 and 3, and obviously 3/10 is greater than 1/10, so my middle number here is going to be 3/10, and I don't need to add that 0 this time, but I can. And then my greatest, or my least, I'm sorry, my least is going to be the 15 hundredths, which I wrote too low for you to see. .38 hundredths, 3/10, and 15 hundredths. So those are from greatest models that they've shown you to compare those. So you've got 3 different ways. You've got your number line that they showed in problem example 1. You've got your place value chart, which you can get, and from this one was from Math Salamanders, but there's a bunch if you just Google place value chart to decimals. Or you can use your grid if you still have your grid paper and with the pictures that way. These will work every time to get you your correct answer. So I strongly suggest when you're doing these, it's not so necessary, but when you're looking at something like number 2 here, where they've got 4/10ths and they're comparing it to 4/100ths, you really want to pay attention to the place value of these and make sure that you are either using your grids or using a place value chart to help you figure out which is greater and which is less to complete these ones. Okay, just for extra support, I'm going to do number 13 and then probably number 18, one from each type of problem. Here you're just going to compare using these symbols, and down here we're going to order from least to greatest, so we can't mess that up with doing it greatest to least. So let's look at number 13. I'm going to use the place value chart first. So I'm looking at 87/100ths, and I'm looking at 78/100ths. And because I start with the greatest, I'm going to start with the 10th place, and I see that 8/10ths is greater than 7/10ths, so I'm going to do that kind of symbol to answer that one. Okay, I want to look at number 12. So they're looking at 2/10ths and 2/100ths. So you want to look and see, let's get this, 2 and 2 and say they're equal. But because one is 2/10ths and one is 2/100ths, they're going to go in different places in my place value chart. The 2/10ths is going to go in the 10th place, and the 2/100ths is going to go in the 100th place. So we need to fill in with zeros to fill in those places, which when we start with our highest place value, we're going to see that 2/10ths is greater than 2/100ths. This would be like having 2 dimes as opposed to having 2 pennies. And we know that if you have 2 dimes, you have more money than if you have 2 pennies. So that's how number 12 would be solved. And I want to look at one comparing or doing order least to greatest. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and do number 16. I looked over and there's none that are particularly more challenging than the rest, so I'll just start with 16. So the first thing is I'm going to fill them in my place. So 5/10ths, 55/100ths, and 6/10ths. And again, since there's zeros in the ones place, that's not going to help me solve it. Now I'm going to look at the 10ths place, and I see 6 is the greatest number there. So if I'm putting them in order from least to greatest, I know that 6/10ths is going to be the greatest. So that one's done. Now I'm looking at 5/10ths and 55/100ths. Well, as we learned from some of the other lessons, I can fill in to get the same out to the same place value, and fill 5/10ths would be equal to 50/100ths. And now that you can see these two are the same, but if you go to your hundredths place value, 5, 0, so 55/100ths is going to be in the middle, and that leaves my least as 50/100ths or 5/10ths. So my least is 5/10ths. And just to keep them separated, that's how that number 16 should look when you're finished with it. Do that for 16, 17, 18, 19, and then you'll be using a number line for continuing on. So for 20 to 23, you are using number line, and for these numbers fall on this number line. But the thing to remember when you're using this is the numbers to the left are the less, and the numbers to the right are the greater numbers. So the farther to the left you are, the less it is, the closer to 0. The farther to the right, the closer you are to 1 whole. So if you're looking at 46/100, and 48 hundredths. You've got 6 here, here. Farther to the right, it's closer to the 1 whole. That one is going to be the greatest. This is true or false? Hopefully you said that this, because remember the alligator eats the bigger number, or the arrow points, in this case the arrow is pointing. I just did number 20, so you can do 21, 22, and 23. Okay, so I looked at the 24 and 25 are balance place, and you can use a place value pair and see which is shorter and which is more for these two problems. But then they get to number 26, the hot problem. What number is halfway between 36 hundredths and 48 hundredths on the number line? So as you can see, I've written out a number line going from 36 hundredths to 48 hundredths. And you can kind of jump in each number until you get to the center. The other way to do it is to cross out until you get to the middle, because the other way to do it is adding up and dividing, and that's kind of complicated. So once you start at both ends and work your way to the middle, you will find a number that is halfway in between those, and that is the answer to number 26. We got another find the error problem. Miles wrote the 3 numbers below in order from least to greatest. Find and correct his mistake. So what did he do when he... You can even leave this one as a fraction if you like. I would probably convert them all to decimals, but you will see pretty quickly that there is a mistake he made with... If you put these digits into a place value chart, you'll see how this is inaccurate. How can I use models to compare decimals? Well, just like we compare the fractions, if we've got more than one shaded, then that's obviously the greater parts of a whole. So anytime you have more pieces shaded, it's going to be the greater fraction, and that's how you can use models. You can also refer back to the example problems where we shaded in the grids, and that'll help you get your word form answer for number 28. If you still have time with this, please continue on through the homework, and we will check it later on. Thanks for your work.